Welcome back to the Zero Weakness Podcast, where we talk about how to be a better lifter, how to be a better coach, and everything in between. Make sure you subscribe and enjoy.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Zero Week Podcast. Today, wow, let's go. Welcome back to another episode of the Zero Weakness Podcast with myself, Tom Brosey, Gidge Dog, and we've got a very special guest, unarguably one of the greatest natural bodybuilders Australia has ever seen.
Yes.
Brandon Kempter from BK Conditioning. I've got a question for you, Brandon. How long have you been doing natural bodybuilding, and how much tren are you on?
All the tren, tren hard. That's my motto. But we're coming up to over a decade now.
Oh, good.
Wow.
Nah, in all seriousness, I just wanted to start off with a funny joke. Brandon, like I said, is unarguably one of the greatest natural bodybuilders and bodybuilding coaches in Australia. Thanks for coming on, Brandon.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Never miss the opportunity to take some time, talk shop, especially with you guys. Always good banter along the way.
Sorry, well, you did miss the opportunity. You didn't show up last time.
This is actually true. I got this message from Henny, and it's like, hey, man, where are you? You're supposed to be here 40 minutes ago, and I'm here like, oh, my God. And it was right in the middle of contest season, so I had all these sleepless nights with guys in the US and whatnot, so I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, guys. But here we are. We made it work. So.
We forgive you. We
Yeah, you're good.
We banged out an episode. We covered it. We covered for you.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. We like to start this podcast just by going around the circle and saying what we're grateful for. So we're going to throw you under the bus. What are you grateful for this week, Brandon?
I'm grateful to have the ability to work with amazing athletes. I'm grateful to have an able body which allows me to pursue the athletic endeavors that bring me bottomless joy to my life.
Wow.
Bottomless.
Bottomless.
Oh, bottomless.
It could be bottomless, whatever.
I thought you said bottomless, and I was like, he just made up a word, and I really like it.
Let's roll with it.
This is going to be a good podcast because I like hearing you talk because you talk so well, and Brandon is in the same category.
Nah, I can't understand Brandon. I just act like I do.
I know, it's clear, bottomless.
All right, Gidge, what are you grateful for this week?
The new air conditioning.
Nice.
Thank you, Thomas.
You're
It's
welcome.
made training so much nicer now that the weather's warming up.
We'll see how that goes over time, I've had a few comments like, oh, gyms are meant to be hot.
Oh my goodness.
We'll see what happens.
Can't please everybody.
Dogs.
James.
I am grateful for, my work environment. I know I say this every week, but this is pretty cool. Like, got Brandon on for a podcast, get to talk shit with my family. This guy's my boss. That's pretty cool.
It's great.
I'll take Dad.
What about you, Thomas?
I'm grateful for music. I'm
Yeah.
grateful for music. I don't give enough time to playing music, and every time I do, I remember how much I love it and how meditative it is. And yeah, this week I'm grateful for music.
1000%.
Amazing.
Great
That's
one.
me. Speaking of which, let's ask Brandon another question. What's your like go-to song? Do you do hype up music, or are you a no headphones kind of guy?
I'm definitely one that loves music. I definitely believe anecdotally that it is performance enhancing. I actually did a lit review on this as part of my master's. The research would indicate it does as well. Nice. But in terms of your initial question, in terms of hype up track, I'm actually pretty versatile. As you guys know, I train with high arousal. I'm the guy that pinches his eyelids, slaps his thighs to get in the zone. So when I'm dieting, it's usually going to be something heavy. But when I'm in the off season, we can get into some cruisy R&B. It's all good.
Nice.
Nice.
So yeah,
I like it. All right. Well, this podcast is all about you. So let's start with where it all began. How did you get into training in the first place?
On a dark, stormy night. No, I'm just kidding. But for me, training really started on my family's farm. We lived out in the bush. Didn't really have access to gym equipment, but I grew up reading a lot of comics, and everyone was jacked. Even Spider-Man, the Silky, was jacked too. So I was like, all right, cool, I'm going to have to start training. I really want to get into that kind of shape. Here's me at about 14, 15 years old. And at the time, I was essentially lifting anything that I could find on the property. So, bags of concrete that went off. Cool, we can do bicep curls with that. We can sling it over the shoulder. We can do lunges, etc. Went down the forestry, cut myself a couple of trees down, made myself a self-spotting rig so I could take my bench press to failure. So that's really kind of where it started. And then, having access to a gym upon getting a driver's license was like, wow, this is absolutely amazing. So I mean, that's where it started. From there, I had the opportunity to work in a boutique studio as a personal trainer. And at that time, I really started to experiment with different training styles. I did a bit of CrossFit for a while there as a 18-year-old or so. Back then, I was doing 2-a-days, like AM CrossFit, PM bodybuilding. Nice. Obviously, it can only get you so far. But in my endeavors to optimize my physique, I focused on bodybuilding. And then at 19 years of age, I started competing and went through teenage, juniors, opens, pros, etc.
So back on the farm, was your farm Sunshine Coast?
Sunshine Coast, yeah.
And then you started training on the Sunshine Coast as well.
Yeah.
What sort of pushed you towards your first bodybuilding show? Like, was that always an aspiration from when you started seeing changes in your physique, or was it something that someone was like, "Hey, man, you should give this thing a go"?
Look, it wasn't necessarily any or much in the way of external input. More than anything, it was curiosity. When I started training and I could see that, hey, through training and nutrition, I have the amazing ability to change morphological form. I was like, okay, let's take this canvas that is my body and see how far we can take it. And one of the things that I really cherish about that first run into stage is I knew little about, my competitors or anything like that. Social media was hardly a thing. I rolled into this show bringing my best at the time with the knowledge that was available and happened to, thankfully, gratefully, win the teenage division. And that was this kickstart, like, hey, this is actually something that I might actually be good at. I knew that I had the grit and determination that perhaps not everyone had. And from there, that passion was really ignited and supercharged.
So that was 19 years old. How old are you now?
I am 29.
Okay, so 10 years ago. 10-year career so far. I like it.
Thus far, yes.
Yeah, awesome. And what then sort of, that spark was lit. You started training, competing. Eventually you moved down here. Talk us through the transition between being up there, what sort of encouraged you to move down here, and then how did that sort of impact on your competitive side of things before we move into like the actual coaching side of things?
Yeah, well, look, I've been down here since 2014. Prior to that, I was on the Sunshine Coast. My parents live in the hinterland on a bit of land up there. But for a good chunk of time, I did live in Caloundra, which has its own bodybuilding community. It's pretty cool. But I actually came down here because I was offered a position at a good friend of mine's gym, Nathan Wallace, and I actually worked within that for a couple of years, and his gym was very, very bodybuilding specific. So there, as basically a single 21-year-old, I think at the time, it was just cool. I get to live and breathe bodybuilding every moment of the day. And it definitely supercharged my physique and obviously from a professional perspective as well through that time.
Mm-hmm. And in those early phases, like when you competed at age 19, were you doing your own thing or did you enlisted the help of a coach at that stage?
When I competed at 19, I did that solo, which is, to be fair, I mean, that's very challenging. But thankfully, being more, I suppose, a tech-savvy tech-savvy like generation, I had access to a lot of information, and I was also studying at that time as well, in the discipline. So, yeah.
What were your early influences? Like when you say you had access to information, who were you sort of subscribing to back then?
Oh, I mean, definitely Helms was coming up there, Berto Nunez, those guys, Matt Ogus as well was sort of the OG when it comes to flexible dieting. And also I did have some influence from a couple of the academics at USC as well, who had their hands in the bodybuilding side of things a little bit. So those guys were my primary kind of source of information at that time. Yeah.
It's so cool to see people like Matt Ogus, Alberto Nunez, and obviously Eric Helms, but they're still like pioneers and they're still like the reigning champs, you could say, in natural bodybuilding, which is so cool to see.
I would say like for their influence has been phenomenal. I think that in the natural and in the, I suppose you could say, modern era, those guys have had a major influential role.
Yeah, I used to love Matt Ogus and was it Legends of Aesthetics?
LOA.
Yeah, yes. They were awesome. I remember, so I've never actually worn a stringer, but I did buy a stringer one time because of Matt Ogus. I was like, he looks sick in a stringer. And he's half Filipino as well. So I remember I bought a stringer, I put it on, and I said, nah, this is not it. And I never wore it. I chucked it out. I was like, nah, that was embarrassing. I was like, yeah, I'm in good shape. And I put on a stringer, and that just reveals everything. If you want to know how bad shape you're in, put on a stringer. So that was my introduction to stringers. But Brandon, obviously as a bodybuilder and a really good bodybuilder, nutrition plays a huge part in your performance. What does a day of eating look like for you?
Well, look, a day of eating is specific to what that looks like is specific to the individual phase. But I'm definitely a big proponent of making sure that regardless of the phase, you have structures in place which are conducive to ensuring an appropriate micronutrient profile. So as part of that, we adhere to the fundamentals in terms of getting enough quantity and diversity of minimally processed plant-based matter.
He eats vegetables.
Yes, I do.
I'm just going to translate for the listener every now and again.
Yeah, CJ, can we get some subtitles?
Yeah, but I mean, in the off season, I will generally participate in phasic periods of energy surplus, followed by small stints in a deficit, i.e. a mini cut. I will say that these days my energy requirements are much less, being basically a glorified desk worker compared to when I was a personal trainer. So back in the day, pushing 5,500 calories, that was a big deal, hard to do. But these days, I'm going to comfortably gain on high 3,000s. It's pretty comfortable. So I mean, most of my days, I have my fundamental sort of 3 meals, which to be fair, 2 of those will be liquid when I'm gaining because it's very hard to get the food in. Food motivation is low. And then we'll fill in the gaps with the fundamentals, fruit, vegetables, etc. So basic, essentially.
It's I got a funny story about nutrition with Brandon. So Brandon, he actually used to run his business out of this gym this gym and the old one, PTC. And I remember one day, Thomas, remember when Brandon was eating kangaroo mints? He made like kangaroo mint sandwiches, like burgers. And I remember the next day, I was like, fuck, Brandon does that. I'm doing that too. So I came in with my kangaroo burgers. And as soon as Thomas saw the fridge, he goes, bro, you're just doing that because you saw Brandon doing that. I was like, nah. And then Thomas pulled out his kangaroo burgers as well. We just saw Brandon. He's jacked. I'm doing that.
Yeah. My favorite Brandon nutrition story, I can't remember if you were in prep or not. I think you were in prep. But it was the first time we got white monsters in the fridge. And Brandon was eating a tub of like rice and chicken. And he got out the white monster, looks at the back of it. The white monster isn't completely 0 calories. It has like 8 calories or something. He's like, oh, I'm going to have this. And then he like individually picked out a whole bunch of grains of rice and threw them out to like
no way
account for those calories.
Everything counts in contest prep. Would I do that in the off season? No, I wouldn't. But in contest preparation, everything counts. The more tightly we can control those variables, the more predictable the result. And if we're going for that top level result, we need everything in our favor. So that definitely sounds like something I would 110% do.
No, but I love it. I mean, like that's the craft that has elevated you to have the kind of conditioning that you come in with, and your athletes too. Like you see that that's the common thing with your athletes. They are fucking conditioned.
Every single one of them. I remember at the old gym when you used to bring in your athletes, I'd just be like, look at this guy. This guy is diced. Every single one of them.
It's really interesting because like before you worked here or worked out of here, I'd never really been exposed to bodybuilders in that deep phase of contest prep. Like I had never seen people that shredded up close. It's phenomenal.
It's definitely a different ball game. And it's an interesting genre of sport. And I remember chatting to you one day and you said like, wow, like it's been crazy to watch this guy just literally transform before my eyes over the past 25 weeks. And I'm like, this is what we do. I mean, and it's a big part of what makes my job super exciting. I mean, from both as an athlete and coach, it's just amazing just to see this physique literally transform before your eyes. It's really, really amazing.
So let's go back to, you won that show, you eventually moved down here. Did you eventually enlist a coach, or have you been doing it solo the whole time, just picking up your influences and education along the way?
Yeah, look, I definitely had some external influence across my last few preparations. I believe that no matter how well informed you are, at the end of a contest preparation, it becomes very, very challenging to maintain an objective eye. We start to make silly decisions because our emotions determine how we perceive our physique. So sometimes the decisions we make aren't exactly logical. So I had my good friend Nathan Wallace, who I have obviously a long relationship with him. He's a good friend of mine. and even in my last contest preparation, he was my eyes, because I'm one of those individuals of whom loves the suck, so to speak. I have a positive association with pain and discomfort. So if anything in a contest preparation, I'm going to go too hard, I'll be the guy that goes until I injure myself or whatever. Because again, I have this positive association with strategic and methodic suffering being essentially beneficial to one's result. So he's that individual that's my eyes. Like, hey man, it's all good, chill out, or give yourself a slap in the face. You don't need to do that, etc. So yeah, he's been instrumental for me over the years. Absolutely.
As you've come up through the ranks, what would you say is the body part that you've had to work on the most?
Chest and hamstrings. And calves, I mean, there's still nothing there, but But I would say they're the two key areas I had to work on the most, yeah.
Uh-huh. And going back a step, sorry to keep jumping around like this, but just while I'm thinking of it, that use of external eyes to prevent the emotion taking hold too much. What are some of the most common mistakes that bodybuilders make that deep in prep that can sabotage the result by the end?
Oh, I mean, look, it can go many, many ways. But again, I just think that by the end of a contest preparation, you are sort of physique checking many times through the day, whether you like it or not. And again, your sort of emotions can affect how you perceive your physique. One day it's an emotional roller coaster. Okay, cool. I'm flat in this current phase. Therefore, I'm not my largest being. So, okay, now I'm feeling small, but then maybe the next day, okay, actually, I'm feeling a little bit soft. I have more to go in terms of conditioning. So I think we see some people who aren't aggressive enough in their diet, some people who are more aggressive than they need to be. And given these emotions as well, sometimes that transfers to people's training as well. You need to go against your biological cues to conserve energy at the end of a contest prep. You don't feel like moving, you need to. You don't feel like training, get in, get it done. So it can go a multitude of ways, but I think you just have to have that external viewpoint, because I believe that contest preparation is the science of the art. The science is knowing what variables you can change, what influence it should have on the body, and the art is knowing how to interpret what you're seeing and knowing what combination of variables and to what magnitudes you need to update that. And that art is lost when you are, or rather, your ability to apply the art of contest prep is skewed, no matter how knowledgeable you are at the end of a contest prep. And that really didn't answer your question, but hopefully there's something useful there.
No, it gives insight. It definitely gives insight. And I mean, not to try and draw too many parallels to powerlifting, but it's kind of similar in the sense that the more the emotional investment increases, and it's the same as towards the end of a peak, the more, even if you are knowledgeable, you know what you're looking for, you know what you're looking at, you'll create pathways of justification to make the wrong decision. And
100%.
So having that external objective set of eyes or input is going to help a lot.
Exactly right. Like, you will find ways to justify certain things along the way if you're not careful. You got to be able to call yourself out in your BS. And I think most people struggle with that. That's where that external influence comes in and says, hey, this is where it's at. Good to go.
Mm-hmm. How do you know? Because obviously we talked about before, like every single one of your clients, like you're known for your conditioning, like yourself and your clients. How do you know that? Because to me, it seems like every single one of your athletes get to that level of conditioning. Do you have a screening process on how to, like, when people come to you and want to work with you, like, how do you know which athletes to take on? And is it a process like that or anything?
Well, I mean, let me start from the first point there. I mean, look, as a start, thank you very much that you notice that everyone's in shape. That means a lot to me. Consistency is important. Like, that's the thing I notice when I see, like, the athletes that you guys put out. I'm like, it's consistency. You guys are always bringing quality, not just a once off. It's consistently. So that's something I notice, and it always means a lot when it's noticed on the bodybuilding side of things. I mean, we do have a screening process in terms of the fundamentals, in terms of making sure one is a perfect picture of health before commencing what is a very stressful endeavor on the body. But I mean, in terms of screening someone deeper beyond that, I believe anyone can get into a top level shape from the perspective of conditioning, provided we have time, strategy, and work ethic. I suppose you call it screening, is that we work with a lot of our athletes long term in the off season. As part of that, we get to know our athletes in terms of where their limitations lie, and we get to work on creating the mental toughness which is required to achieve that top level of conditioning. So it's not that we're going to have an athlete come to us and we're like, I don't think you're made of this stuff, go away. It's more a matter of, okay, you're not made of it yet. Let's work on that and get you to a position where you've got the knowledge and the mental toughness to take on this contest prep. And that might be a 2-year process. It could be 18 months. It really depends.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing I picked up on that you told me early on about your coaching is that you're not afraid to say no to people. Like too many coaches, they're just like, oh, you want to do season 8? Yeah, let's do it. It's in 6 months' time. You're the kind of person that's like, I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to be able to produce the best result out of you.
Yeah, that's true. And it's really hard to say no. I think especially if you're a trainer coming up, and a lot of trainers coming up who perhaps endeavor to work in physique sports, which is the only area of sport I work in, it is, in that scenario, I imagine, very, very hard to say no. But the way I look at it is this. When I put it to an athlete and they say to me, look, I want to do season A, let's say it's 15 weeks' time, and I say, look, I think it's in your best interest for your result to look at the next season. That gives us, 40 weeks. And the way I'd usually frame it to them is like this. If you want to see someone else, you can. They will take you on, but they don't have your best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. What am I gaining from telling you something that you don't want to hear? There's every possibility you can walk away now. And in most scenarios, people are going to be pretty receptive to that. This person has my best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. I'm cool to play the long game. And thankfully, in my scenario, I work with a lot of athletes that are veterans. They know it's not going to be an overnight process.
Yep. It's a very powerful sales tool. It's called damaging admissions. You say what's not good about your service, and not good is very subjective. It's actually really good to say where a weakness is in terms of, I'm not just going to say yes to everyone.
I thought you just have zero weakness, nothing. Don't worry at all.
Damn, I like that. I like that a lot.
Well, there's actually no such thing as zero weakness. It's just the absence
of strength.
Far out. Okay, moving on. I'm really curious. You said as part of that, one of the things you want to do is develop someone's mental toughness in the quote unquote off season, so that they can handle the kind of demands that they're going to be under when it comes to prep. What are the mechanics of that? Like, how do you actually develop someone's mental toughness?
Well, the short answer is through repeated exposure. So a couple of things. In the off season, we will, obviously as hypertrophy athletes, it's a intensity and volume mediated adaptation. So we usually do some video analysis, and rather than really focusing solely on technique, or primarily on technique, which you guys will, obviously we are relying on technique, but more than anything, we're going to use movements that are less skill specific, and we're probably going to be assessing concentric contraction velocity and proximity to failure. Within that sort of thing, we can teach an athlete how to train hard. I often say that for bodybuilders, we teach new athletes how to train hard, and we teach advanced athletes when to train hard. Now you push, now you pull back. Mm-hmm. So through that sort of thing, we can teach an athlete what it's like to train at that top level. And then we're also creating some fundamental positive habits pertaining to their nutrition, particularly in short dieting stints like mini cuts. Although it's not as hard as a contest prep, there's habits there that are going to, good and bad, that are going to rear their head that we can kind of refine for the contest preparation. So through that, we can learn, okay, there's certain areas in your lifestyle that need to be modified in order for you to achieve that high-end result that is a contest prep. Okay, cool, we can work on that.
Have you found it challenging sending the message of intensity across to people since you've branched more away from in-person to online coaching? Because obviously when you've got James was talking about before going on the pendulum squat with you, like if you do a pendulum squat with Brandon, you're going to have a bad time guaranteed. So like how do you deliver that message online consistently? Like there's obviously some strategy that you use, or your experienced eye to watch someone actually train and be like, I think he can push that harder or not, but it's all retrospective. So I'm curious how you found that process of getting that intensity message across to people.
It's definitely challenging on an online basis. And I will say this, I originally was the in-person guy. I was in-person personal trainer. Didn't want to know much about this online side of things. I ventured into that area by necessity of people wanting to work in the outside of my geographic location. And the reason I didn't want to go online originally was because I thought, I don't want people to feel like they're just a number, and I like to build meaningful relationships. But I think that taking that perspective, the in-person feel and vibe to the online space, is something that's really worked well. Mm-hmm. To your question, portraying that necessity for intensity is definitely challenging. Video analysis is great. I do my check-ins via video, so I'm able to really show expression through that process, and using as many descriptors as possible. Okay, this is how it should feel, et cetera, and then basically again repeated exposure. You based on this, you clearly have at least 5 more reps in the reserve if someone had a gun to your head. So next week, put 10 more kilos on it, and let's do the same again. Okay, we have a look next week. Actually, you know what? You've still got more in the tank. Cool. You need to experience true failure, I think, multiple times so you're actually able to judge what intensity is.
That's it's funny you say that, because I've still got clients that are still getting used to and understanding, RPEs and RIRs, and until I'm with them and I talk them through the process, I'm like, all right, this is what it should feel like. This is what you should be doing. Now your reps are finally slowing down. That's a true gauge of what your RPE is. So you've been undershooting this whole time, kind of thing.
Involuntarily slowing down.
Yeah. But so obviously you've been known, we've seen you around here like squat, bench, deadlift. You always prioritize some kind of powerlifting movement or some kind of compound movement. Does your programming...
Hang on. When have you seen Brandon squat?
Yeah.
Well,
it's been a long time for squat.
So the one time I did see Brandon squat, he's doing sets of 15 with 150.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Sounds about right. Sounds like Brandon.
I was like, this is nuts. But so obviously, yeah, like I said, you prioritize some kind of movement. Does your programming look quite similar across the board for all your athletes?
I mean, obviously programming is personalized, but I think if you're an absolute bodybuilding purist, you would say that, hey, we should just rely on movements that are primarily machine-based, that are low skill, and we can, offset the stability to the machine, just focus on intensity with less regard for technique, because, hypertrophy is intensity and volume mediated. This is going to be great. And in theory, that does hold up. But I do believe there is benefit in performing some of the bigger power lifts for broad development. I don't think they should comprise a massive volume allotment. So, for example, in my scenario, there was a point there I was doing deadlifts every second week for 2 sets, and that's, if you're training hard, I mean, that's effective. But again, it's a small part of the programming. But I think for overall development, there's certainly benefit, but it's not essential. If you have an individual that has maybe structural anthropometry doesn't sit right with that particular movement, it's a pain in the backside, or maybe their injury, they continue to get injuries in a particular movement. Yes, of course, we could spend a whole bunch of time working on their tech, but is it worth it? So, you got to weigh that up. But me personally, I will do those big lifts. I've recently got back into squatting, so mate.
Nice.
Front squatting, because that's the most hypertrophy specific squat variation for me. But I do believe there's potential benefit there with their inclusion. And for my athletes, if they're able to do so, we often have a volume allotment set aside for those bigger lifts.
Because I've just got one of my face-to-face clients, Nikki Huser, who trains like an absolute animal. She's actually just jumped on board with Brandon.
Yeah.
And so her thing was with bodybuilding, she's like, wanted to try something new, came in here, learned how to do squat, bench, deadlift, with the principles and systems that we use at Zero. And she's like, I love this.
Yeah.
But I love bodybuilding more. So, and she really wanted to get on with Brandon. So I feel like I kind of helped in, planting that seed, messaging Brandon. And now she works with Brandon, but she still trains here face-to-face with me.
Yeah.
Because she's like, I really enjoy squat, bench, deadlift. Yeah. And she's getting really good at them.
She is. Yeah, she's a weapon.
She is a weapon. And can I just she's a weapon, man. What I like about her is she just gets in and does it.
Yeah.
So no matter what, it's like, hey, I want this, I'm going to do it. And that's an athlete mindset right there. Is they got this outcome in mind and they're process orientated. I need to do X, Y, Z to achieve that. Let's go. But just jump back a couple points there. You're talking about the squat, dead, and bench and bodybuilding training. One thing I find really fascinating about our industry is we are, whether you like it or not, a very trend-based industry, and the pendulum swings in extremes, and he who has the most extreme perspective gets the most attention. And if we look back, say, 10 years ago, power building, bodylifting was very big, right? And as part of that, in that era, myself included, we're doing a lot of squat and bench. It was a bigger portion of my volume than it is now. But in these days, the pendulum swung in the opposite direction, where it's like, okay, we're really aware of our FSR, and we're going to use just machine base. And I think that is also equally limiting. Should be in the middle here. There is potential benefit for those big lifts. There is some downsides. They're technical, and maybe they come at a higher fatigue cost in terms of central fatigue accumulation. Maybe they're not as hypertrophy specific by way of the range of movement that we accumulate within something like a deadlift, which is partial in every joint structure. But I don't think we should completely just ride them off either. So time and place, context specific.
Yeah, I think it's just in Nikki's case as well, because she like I said, she's got a very high work rate.
Yeah,
loves working really hard in the gym, really understands how to push her RIRs and RPs and things like that. But I always try to say to people who are in a similar boat to Nikki, like squat, bench, deadlift, this is the skill. We're going to practice this skill.
Yeah.
And then we're going to, really push the volume and intensity on some of our machine-based exercise and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's really fun to see someone like Nikki who's got really, high aspirations in bodybuilding. She's already a great bodybuilder, but it's cool seeing her, pay such attention to detail in squat, bench, deadlift.
I think that both sports, whether it's bodybuilding and powerlifting, you can take a leaf out of each book. I mean, you guys are the artists of the squat, dead, and bench. If you want to learn how to squat, dead, and bench and put yourself in the most mechanically advantageous position, you see a powerlifter. But again, you can take a leaf out of each there. When you guys are in the off season, maybe there is some benefit to driving RP right up in some of those accessories where you guys are just trying to put on muscle mass and then later on, maximize your functional capacity to express good technique in 1RM in the squat, dead, bench. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that there's productive components from each.
And body composition as well. Like powerlifters benefit from having the most muscle mass and the least amount of fat that they can comfortably carry in a calorie sort of neutral environment to benefit in their weight class.
Yeah, 100%.
No, that's really cool. What was I about to say? I was going to say, so then going back to your story, bodybuilding eventually came down here, competing more, getting better and better, rising up through the ranks, becoming pro. Where did coaching come into that for you? Yeah.
Well, through that time, I was personal training. And basically 2014, thereabouts, when I did move to the Gold Coast, and I was working out of I suppose you could say a bodybuilding specific version of this gym. It was just bodybuilding, basically.
Yeah.
And that's where I really specialized. And from basically mid-2014 to this day, I work exclusively with physique athletes.
Did you find it hard letting go of general personal training and going right down the road of bodybuilding, or you were so deep into it that it was just exactly what you wanted?
It was exactly what I wanted, to be honest. And people often ask me, like, would you ever look at working with Gen Pop again? And I have all the respect in the world for people that do, because I believe they make a meaningful difference. So you're going to extend someone's life by actually, giving them a body composition conducive to health. And I'm just going to tell people how to get shredded and give them an eating disorder. Joking, of course. So I have all the respect for it, but I don't know how to think like a Gen Pop. None of my systems are calibrated for Gen Pop. So my ability to relate and be empathetic, which I think is really important, is just non-existent for the Gen Pop.
Yep.
So at this point, then I had no issue transitioning, and at this point, I can't see myself working with Gen Pop anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. What sort of advice would you give to aspiring bodybuilding coaches that are the PT in the Good Life or the World Gym that are looking to specialize more in bodybuilding? How can they transition towards that direction?
Well, I'd give a few points. I would say, one, invest in your education, whether it's through mentorship or through conventional tertiary pathways in the areas of exercise and nutrition science. But above and beyond that, I would certainly recommend that you seek coaching. That could be in part of mentorship, and you participate in the sport. We've often had these discussions, myself and colleagues, about, okay, can you actually be a bodybuilding coach if you've never participated? And the straight answer to that is yes, but I think there's major downside. It's such a unique sport, and same with powerlifting. Like, I don't pretend to coach powerlifters if I haven't participated in. I don't know what it's like on the day. What's the energy like? How's the timing run? Like, what is the athlete experiencing? But I definitely say participating in the sport is a must, in my views at least. And you don't necessarily need to be the best athlete. I don't think being a pro bodybuilder by default makes you a good coach. It does not. But you need to compete at a high level, as in for you. Take your canvas that is your physique to a high level. That gives you that unique relatability. And I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, it just comes back to exactly what you were just talking about, which is empathy. How can you empathize with someone competing at a high level if you've never been there? You don't know what it feels like. You don't know the pressure that's put on you, both externally and internally. What you were talking about before, you were talking about conveying the sense of feeling through the online medium. You can't do that if you've never felt what hard training feels like.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So much of what we do centers around feeling and communicating that feeling to people. So I completely echo that. Absolutely.
In like a really tech-savvy era where, Instagram, TikTok, social media platforms, it's almost like the main driver of a lot of these bodybuilding and fitness influencers businesses. How have you managed to keep your brand so integral during this phase? And have you managed to stay clear of any arguments, all the bullshit? Like, unfortunately, in our industry, there's a lot of, head-to-head, like shit talking and stuff on the internet. How have you managed to stay clear of all of it? I've never heard of you in an argument. I've never seen you shit post. I've never seen you do any of that.
Well, look, I think the social media side of things, it is incredibly important in our line of work. And I mean, to answer the few subsections in that question, look, I'm very clear to my message in terms of coaching. I coach for it's athlete-centered coaching. So I'm not someone who I don't feel the need to go out there and big mouth myself on social media or anything like that. I believe that the physique speaks. So whether it's myself, my athletes, if people are noticing, hey, these guys look great, that's great. And I'm never going to be the person who's going to tear down someone else, like, oh, this person's rubbish or anything like that, because as cliche as it sounds, like, I would hate to be treated like that. And I believe that everyone's out there doing their best. And if someone's there is people putting out deliberate misinformation, that absolutely frustrates me. But outside of that, sometimes you have people putting out misinformation accidentally because, and especially in this day and age, so not to go off topic here, but on the topic of social media, we have a lot of, in our day and age, is a lot of people of whom want to be quote unquote evidence-based, but we have a lot of people who don't have scientific training, which means they can't read, interpret, and critically analyze research. So what they do is they find someone on Instagram who sounds scientific-ish and then just take their word for gospel, and then it's like Chinese whispers and there's no peer review on social media and you end up with a lot of crap. So I mean, like in that, again, I'm going off on a topic here, off on a tangent here, but I would never bring someone down. I just don't believe it's necessary.
I always find it odd because I think the same thing. It's really weird when you see powerlifting coaches, bodybuilding coaches attacking each other online, tearing down what they do. It's like, bro, that's that guy's job. He's trying to feed his family.
Question 2. You love powerlifting. I love bodybuilding. So what benefit is it doing powerlifting or bodybuilding for me to tear down another bodybuilding or powerlifting coach? Someone of whom has the love for the iron, who's bringing people to our sport. We should be lifting one another up. Like people say to me like, oh, enhanced bodybuilding and natural bodybuilding. I'm like, I have a love and appreciation for both. Like if you're down for bodybuilding, then I'm like, I'm down with you. This is great. Like you're participating in the sport which we love. This is good. So yeah, I don't understand it, but hey.
I mean, it's almost like we have a responsibility as leaders and experts in the industry to send a positive message out, and that involves education as well. And I think what's important to I heard it put a good way this morning actually, which is, if we are teaching someone a book, we don't need to know the whole book. We just have to be one chapter ahead of them,
right?
And so like we have to understand that people are at certain chapters through this journey of knowledge and education. And if we're a step ahead of them, we've got a responsibility to pass that message on. And the people that are steps ahead of us, we've got a responsibility to learn and grow and listen. And so, yeah, you're right. 100% right. There's some accidental misinformation out there, and we don't want to shut people down because we have to remember they've got the same intentions as us. They want to give the best of, they want their clients to have the absolute best. And they're doing that with the knowledge and the skills and the tools that they have
at that time.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we shouldn't discourage that. We should encourage that and also promote ongoing education, learning, development, all of that sort of good stuff.
110%. Yeah.
It's funny, like when we hear about I think we've said this on past podcasts before, when people say, "Oh, my coach sabotaged me," he was holding me back. It's like, nah, your coach wasn't doing that at all. Your coach had your best interests in whether it's your expression of strength, competing powerlifting or bodybuilding. They're doing their best with the tools and information that they have. They literally gave it their best crack. This is their job. They're trying to make money. I think they want to do a pretty good job of it.
It doesn't serve them a service to give you a poor result.
Exactly. I'm curious to hear what what your experience has been like. It's very different. I don't have much experience coaching bodybuilders, so it's a very different experience for us. People do get the emotional investment and get more emotional towards the end of a prep, if you can call it that, a peak. But I feel like we're working in very different conditions. Towards the end of a peak in powerlifting, you should be eating more. You should be in a calorie neutral or calorie surplus. You're feeling good. You're rested. You're deloading. You're feeling strong. You're peaking.
Yes.
Whereas for you guys, it's the opposite. Emotions are high. Food is low. Everyone's hangry. Everyone's grumpy. What's your experience been dealing with people in highly emotional states like that? And what advice would you have to up-and-coming coaches as to how they can deal with people in highly emotional states without taking that on board themselves and basically burning themselves out and hating the sport?
Look, I think that we are emotional beings, and it's important to acknowledge that. But it's also important in those times to appeal to logic. You feel like this because of X, Y, Z. So in that scenario, it's like, hey, I'm really feeling pretty horrible B at the end. And don't get me wrong, there's a certain level of normal with feeling horrible, but then there's a point where it's too much, and you gotta understand this. But I mean, I would ask that question, right? Like from their perspective, like, why do I feel like this? I feel like this because I am purposely pursuing getting very lean, which involves a long period of hypocaloric dieting. And, is that conducive to my goals? Like, yeah, getting lean it is. So you're able to understand, accept, and move on. We're still emotional beings, but we're able to appeal to logic. And I think from a management strategy, that's a good way to start.
Mm-hmm. One thing you just said there, there's feeling bad and there's feeling kind of too bad.
Yeah.
What are the red flags? Like what sort of things would people say that are like, whoa, something's amiss here? And I gather it doesn't really happen with your people because you've got such a refined, controlled approach. But in other circumstances, what are the red flags of people taking things too far?
I mean, look, at the end of contest preparation, if you are truly lean, even if you have increased your caloric intake back to energy maintenance at the end of a contest prep prior to getting on stage, which represents an ideal situation, you are likely still to experience some general lethargy where your feet feel like there's bricks in your shoes, walking on hard surfaces uncomfortable because of the limited thickness to the fat pads of your feet. You lost half a shoe size. Yeah, your sleeve's a bit disjointed. But when someone comes to me and says, hey, I'm really struggling just to unrack a bar in the gym, I'm feeling that sort of level of fatigue, because your fatigue inputs aren't just training, there's diet fatigue as well, and everything's converging at this one time. Mm-hmm. But then I would say, okay, we really need to make some changes here to when it comes to fatigue management. So I mean, there'll be a couple of bits and pieces. When someone's absolutely not able to sleep because their fatigue is so high, getting through their activities of daily living is not happening. And keeping in mind that no matter whether you're an amateur athlete or a pro bodybuilder, you have other responsibilities in life that need to be taken care of. Most people have occupations outside of bodybuilding, unless you're an IFBB pro. Even then, probably not. You might have kids, etc. So when those other areas, really important areas in life, are affected or not able to be managed, then I would say, okay, now it's a time to reassess. But I mean, outside of that, I mean, if your fatigue is so high and that you're struggling to manage blood pressure to the point where you're just feeling faint all through the day, I would say, okay, these are red flags. You got to draw the line. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything really, really bad happen?
Back in the day when people used to take, actually in natural bodybuilding, you should never take diuretics. But back in the day when I used to go to enhanced federations, when people would deplete fluid and take diuretics, things got scary. On stage, people are like in between judging, wavering side to side, and there's the MC like, hey, do you need some water? And I have actually didn't see this, but I was at a show once where someone depleted. This was actually a natural show, so she probably didn't take diuretics, but
hopefully not.
Well, you would know, hopefully not. But she depleted water so hard that she actually got had some pretty hefty renal issues.
Yeah.
And that was like a ambulance come in and ship her out, and it was like, that was completely unnecessary. For those watching who are bodybuilding enthusiasts, don't deplete your fluid. That's a really good tip as a start. It's unsafe, and at least for bodybuilding, it's unsafe and not going to be conducive to your result anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you just get rid of heaps of intramuscular water and just look really small, right?
Generally speaking. I mean, there's some potential benefit to tapering fluids down a little bit for the sake of not being hyper-hydrated when you're about to get on stage.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the levels of depletion which people used to do, you know, I'm talking 20 hours at 100 milliliters of water or something crazy. I'm like, yeah, this is going to be problematic.
Isn't there a story of Paul Dillett like getting tetanus on stage and having to be carried off
There might be.
or something?
That was actually a bit before my time, so I'm not sure.
All right. Jamie, pull that on. Yeah, there's something like that. I'm going to Google it later.
This is just who for you? Who are your favorite? This is just a random question I just thought of. Who are your favorite bodybuilders? Let's go with enhanced. Do you watch the enhanced stuff?
I do watch the enhanced stuff. Yeah, certainly. Look, I'm definitely quite a fan of the old school. Tom Platt's one of my favorite bodybuilders.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is not just his physique. I mean, it wasn't the greatest physique. He had some freaky legs though, but it was his mentality,
Intensity.
I love the way he trained.
He's famous for saying something on the lines of, when you're going through your set and you think you can't do any more, do 5 more. And then once you've done that, do some partials. When you can't hold the bar, like that's an indication that the set might be over. And I'm like, okay, I really like this. This is cool. So he'd be one of my favorite of the old school bodybuilders on the enhanced side of things. I mean, natural side of things, there's definitely some amazing, there's some amazing guys across the board. I'm definitely a big fan of Nunez because he is a quality over quantity athlete. I'm not the biggest frame guy, so that kind of resonates with me. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some great athletes getting around.
Tom Platz, he was one of my first favorite, like, would you call it golden era bodybuilding?
Yeah.
He was one of my first favorite golden era bodybuilders. I just remember a video of him on the hack squat.
Yeah.
Squatting like ass to grass. And he's got like, just the white knee wraps on, little purple bike tights on, a crop top and a headband. And I was like, this guy's the man.
The golden eagle.
Yeah.
It was Kevin Levrone for me.
Yeah.
Kevin Levrone and Lee Priest.
Actually, Priest was also amazing. I've never seen anything like it since then. At 168 centimeters tall.
Yeah, he's same height as me.
Yeah, just the muscle bellies was nuts.
Same muscle bellies.
I've got a photo on my phone of him in the off season out angling a guy at like a car race, and it's my favorite bodybuilding photo of all time. It's not bodybuilding photo, but it's a bodybuilder. Like the size of his arm next to this person. I used to look at it before every training session when I was a teenager.
It's nuts.
It's like so good.
I just loved how out of shape Lee Priest got in his off season.
I don't know if that was intentional or not. I'm just saying, like,
I just loved he loved smashing KFC. That was his thing.
Whatever he was doing, he's packing away some cows.
Yeah,
pretty up there in the off season.
What's your guilty pleasures then for food? What's your must have after a prep?
To be fair, I'm not overly food focused, which works to my advantage. But don't get me wrong, at the end of a contest preparation, food focus, appetite is definitely much higher. That's actually a good question. After my last show, what did I do? I was in the US. I went to a sandwich bar. They don't do sandwiches like Australia. It's like a full-blown burger.
Yeah. Real sandwiches.
Had a couple of those. Kind of walked out of there with my back arched with the stomach hanging up the front. Like, this is not very comfortable. But nothing that straight away comes to mind. That's how it goes with me.
It's funny because I used to coach Brandon's fiance, the lovely Rachel, and she used to always tell me how Brandon isn't food motivated at all. Like food is what he needs, to
on the most behalf.
Yeah.
Very functional.
Yeah, like food's food. It's like, and she was telling me, she always had a hard time with that because she likes to have wine and enjoy herself. But Brandon, no, he's prepping. That's it.
I think that in general, I mean, our relationship with food is inherently really complex. There's an enjoyment factor, there's a cultural factor, etc. And I'm not immune to those components. It's just that, I suppose, rather thankfully, I wasn't, gifted with this major food desire. And I would say that if you're an individual of whom your favorite thing is to go out 3 times a week and go participate in fine dining, I would say, contest prep's going to be hard for you. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether it's acquired by virtue of my chosen sport and participating in it from such a young age, or if it is probably something more sort of on the hereditary side of things. But yeah, I am pretty functional on that side of things, definitely.
Do you think there's also a genetic component to obviously there is, like with muscle bellies and things like that, but with the outcome and for yourself? Because I've seen a photo of your mum and she's jacked as well.
Yeah.
So she
used to come in here time to time.
She used to, yeah. Look, on the topic of genetics play a role in essentially everything. From, like you said, muscle architecture, skeletal structure, etc. And as I often say, when it comes to nutrition and training, genetics, well, basically we're all built around the same 11 systems. We'll respond to the same principles, but genetics will in part influence the magnitude of change per unit of input, whether it's training or nutrition. Advanced athlete, so two athletes with the same training age, one person needs more volume or less volume to get a similar result, etc. So hereditary genetics definitely play a role, even when it comes to one's proclivity for fat loss and lean mass retention. I mean, there's many variables coming to that, but I would argue that genetics do influence it as well. And I mean, the guys at the top of the game, whether it's natural or not, they do represent, hereditary enigmas. They've got the strategy, they've got the time, they've got the work ethic, plus they've got genetics. And I suppose on my side of things, my mother, I mean, she's a purebred athlete from a young age, so there's an environmental piece there as well. So yeah, I mean, she's at 55. They grow all their food on their farm, still train 6 hours a week on silks. So she's got these cap delts and six-pack abs, from essentially good living and very high outputs for many years.
Wild.
So does your mum compete in bodybuilding as well? Or what does she do?
She does. She's done many things. I mean, she was like gymnastics. Then she was trying to be a stuntwoman for a while. It didn't happen. But then it was horse racing. And more recently, she does silks. So aerial silks.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. What other sports did you do growing up?
Basically, I did BMX for a while.
Nice.
Yeah, nice.
That's
Thomas
about
would
it.
love that.
Oh, man.
The boys.
But I mean, not the BMX on the skate park.
Okay.
But outside of that, it was basically just bodybuilding. Pretty
nice.
pretty simple, right?
Dedicated.
Have you ever strayed away from bodybuilding during your career, like since you're 19 years old? Have you ever actually thought, fuck, I want to do powerlifting? Like, because your training is so, like we said before, you have based a lot of your training around squat, bench, deadlift, or something along those lines, and you've pushed some of those lifts very hard.
Well, I did one. Yeah, go on.
Have you ever been like, I want to compete?
I mean, look, I did a 1 rep max way back in 2018.
The deadlift?
300.
I was there, and every
Really?
every powerlifter was so gutted.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, Thomas, can I put that on the board? You're like, you straps. No, can't count that one.
Sorry.
Walked away with my tail between my legs. But that was a 4-week intensification. I was let's give this a go. But I mean, the thought has crossed my mind. But the thing is, I've always been so focused on the next show that I didn't want to have a short period of time where I just really focused on it. Because I mean, if laws of specificity apply, if you want to be your best bodybuilder, focus on that. You want to be your best powerlifter, focus on that. But I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. My very weak bench press, don't get me wrong, if I focused on it, did a high frequency program and worked on the skill, I'd probably improve there too. But I mean, it's crossed my mind, put it like that.
Mm-hmm. What are your best numbers?
I mean, deadlift is a 300. I think a bench 155. But I mean, it wouldn't have been contest spec, and they didn't pause on the chest. And the squat, I actually can't remember. It's not as strong as you'd think. Maybe 190, something like that. I don't know.
I think you can do more than 190. When I saw you doing the
150 for 15.
Yeah, it was like sets of 15 with 150 high bar. I was like, that's absolutely insane.
Wow.
But again, I mean, the skill of expressing a 1 rep max, it just isn't there. And that's obviously just with SBD knee sleeves. I'm sure if I did a block with you guys, I'd learn to actually use my levers to my advantage in the squat and push out some big weight.
It's the same reason I don't do bodybuilding. I just haven't developed the skill. I just don't want to give it the time to detract from my powerlifting.
I'm with you. I don't want to be too good.
Yeah.
That's it.
hard.
Like, I've got the ability of, genetics, all that. Genetics, load the gun, work ethic is what gets you to the next level. All that shit.
I got all that.
The Filipino Lee priest.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to transition from another sport into bodybuilding besides getting a coach?
I mean, that'd be my main piece of advice. But I do think that people coming from other sports generally do well in bodybuilding, because if you develop mental toughness in something else, whether it's powerlifting, swimming, or whatever, you will definitely have the psychological tools needed to really do well in bodybuilding. I mean, best advice would definitely be, yes, again, I'm repeating you here, but get a coach, someone who's going to fast track knowledge acquisition so that you can be as productive as possible from the get-go, because time is an irreplaceable commodity. And if you want to be your best bodybuilder, it takes substantial time. So why not get a coach, be effective or maximally effective from the get-go, as opposed to faffing around for the first 18 months and then getting in 100% from there.
Yeah, nice.
We joked about this podcast being a free consultation. Some of Bridget's questions are getting very consulty.
Yeah, there you go.
So if I wanted to start dieting...
I've got this friend. All right, Brandon. We've chewed your ear off enough. James is gonna hit you with some this or that's.
Alrighty.
And then we'll call it a day.
All right. This or that, Brandon. Squat, bench, or deadlift?
Deadlift.
Keto or carnivore?
Suit yourself. Oh, is neither an option? Gosh.
You have to pick one.
I would say
and you have to do it.
I would ideally neither, but I would say that the risk of micronutrient deficiency would be less in the keto, much higher than a regular diet, but less than the carnivore diet. So keto.
Favorite natural bodybuilder?
You heard it here first. Brandon wins his next pro show on keto.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great way to lose muscle, but moving on.
Favorite natural bodybuilder? Simeon Panda or Mike O'Hearn?
I'd say between those two, the probability of one of those being natural is probably higher in Simeon, given his BBC genetics, but it's still low.
So Simeon, all right. RPE or RIR?
I'm a bit of the old school. I find myself often using RPE, but I mean, RIR makes very logical sense to me.
Bodybuilding or power building?
Body lifting. No. I do like the concept of power building, so to speak, as we spoke about, yeah.
Tren or Deca?
I don't know, mate.
What's Deca?
All I hear about is the old school bodybuilders talk about Deca and the new school talk about Tren. So let's just say creatine, but
nice.
Tren.
Online or face-to-face?
I like the online side of things. I like them both, man. These I understand this is supposed to be a short answer. Let's just say online, okay?
No, you can elaborate.
Elaborate. Oh, yeah.
You can elaborate.
Look, I like building the relationships that you build in person, but I like having the option to help people who aren't locally based online. So, I mean, and to be fair, all of my business is online, so we'll say online.
Well, part of your success is you've built such a great community online anyway. Like you get people travel from far and wide just to come and do a team day, or at least you when you were doing the blend of in-person and online.
Yeah.
So that ability to translate those personal relationships into the online medium and still develop community and connectedness through your brand is really cool.
Yeah, 100%.
The hack squat or pendulum?
If it's a really good hack squat, I go the hack squat. I think it's going to be better for overall development than the pendulum.
Bench press or dumbbells?
Well, hang on, wait. I want to know why it would be better for overall development.
One of the issues that I have with a pendulum squat is its narrow range of loading. So, you have this narrow section where you have peak load and then it drops off a lot.
Okay.
Whereas if you have a good hack squat, so my favorite is a Cybex, I think you're going to have tension through a larger range. And in both of those movements, you're able to reach end range knee flexion. So I would go a hack.
I use one of those like Kaz designed one of whatever 20 or whatever in the world while I was in the States. One of the Atlantis hack squats.
Hey, what's it like? I've never used an Atlantis hack.
It was a hack squat. I mean, Daniel and I were talking about this. Like at the end of the day, I get there's nuance between them and different ones feel different, but you're moving from point A to point B. Like it's not as, I guess, doesn't feel as varied as say like a chest supported row. Where if the angle's off or the cam is funny, like there's so much variability in how that feels. Whereas like the hack squat, again, I recognize that they do feel different machine to machine. And it felt nice and it was smooth and it felt good, but it was a hack squat.
Was it worth 20 grand or?
I wouldn't pay that much. No.
There is definitely more nuance in a chest press, but there is... Personally, I get on certain hack squat machines and I'm like, yeah, it feels like my knee's going to explode.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I get on a good hack squat where the angle of the sled and the relationship to the foot pad actually fits my structural anthropometry. And I'm like, this is amazing. And that would be a Cybex for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Bench press or dumbbells for pec development?
Definitely dumbbells gives you more variability in your glenohumeral positioning to find comfort and maximize recruitment of the pec.
Testosterone or GPC alpha? No, alpha GPC.
Alpha GPC all day. Good for focus, yes.
Sweet. What do you think about testosterone, by the way?
Testosterone, I wouldn't put much stock in it. I will say that it is currently, actually a couple of things, right? So it's an active steroid by definition. There is a scarcity of research actually evaluating its efficacy, let alone its safety. The papers available on it are actually not of that particular active steroid. So it's even papers that show potential benefit. The transferability to actually testosterone is, well, pretty much nil. It's also currently on the WADA watch list. And generally speaking, if it works, it will be banned with the exception of creatine. Caffeine, good old 1,3-trimethylxanthine was actually banned at one point, is no longer. But generally speaking, if it works, it will be banned. So it's on that watch list. I wouldn't be taking it for the sake of safety or inadvertently potentially ruining your natural status.
Was caffeine completely banned, or did it have a limitation on it?
I believe it was a limitation on
like 200 milligrams or something.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was only like 2009, I think, off the top of my head, where it was taken off. Like, it was really quite recent.
Yeah, I was in uni, and I shared a class and became really good friends with someone who was on the Olympic synchronized swimming team. And she couldn't have caffeine. Like, we were in class, and she's like, I can't have a coffee. It's like, why? And yeah.
Crazy. It's crazy.
That's the only reason I know. What did you ever dabble in the original Jack 3D?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was back in the day. I would have been about 17 years old. Nice. And back then, my sensitivity to stims was through the ceiling. I'd have a coffee once every, 2 weeks. I took this stuff and I'm like, oh, I felt good. I could train all day. So I did. No, but yeah. I mean, if you actually look at the ingredients list, it's actually a pretty average product from the perspective of the other ergogenic, compounds within it. It was just a very stimmy pre-workout, and pretty much the OG. That and NO Explode, and NO Explode make you explode at the backside, so that wasn't very comfortable.
You had to have the full stack. NO Nitrix, NO Explode, and then Cell Mass afterwards.
That's it. That's where it's at. Smart marketing, really smart marketing. That is.
I bought it.
That's actually what I wanted to ask. When you first started, what was your stack?
Yeah, what's your stack?
Like, we all had a real funny stack when we first started lifting. Had to get this BCAA, had to get a
Scivation Extend.
Yeah.
Concrete.
Yeah. What did yours look like?
I remember that actually. When I started lifting, I was very short on currency. So basically, my main stack was like dried milk powder for protein, because I couldn't get my hands on whey protein on a very much student budget. I do remember getting creatine. I remember being super nervous taking creatine. Like, oh my God, I'm going
natty.
I might fuck up the loading phase.
I'm going to fucking explode tomorrow. I'm going to get huge. Disappointed? No, but creatine is a great product. But definitely creatine. And there was a time where, when I could afford to do so, I definitely get into the fundamentals. Whey protein, BCAAs, back in the day, and there used to be a product from Muscle Farm, which is a pre-workout, and to this day I actually love this product because it was like a protein scoop worth. So it actually had a full ergogenic dose of a lot of great products like creatine included, and that was a wonderful product. I used to take that.
What's it called?
In my career. I think Muscle Farm Salt. They still make it, I think, but it's a micro dose like everything else these days because it's too expensive to actually give you a clinical serving of the stuff you want.
What was the first whey protein you got?
Because I was on a student's budget back then, it was plain whey protein. I used to get that stuff for $17 a kilo, and mixed with water, enough to make you want to throw up. But I'd do it back in the day.
Plain protein is disgusting.
It is nuts. Instantized BCAAs, that is also equally disgusting. Yeah. It's like a cappuccino, has no mixability, and you're skimming that stuff off the top of your horrible tasting water. Yeah.
Nothing's worse than pea protein.
Yeah.
That was my first protein, international protein, pea protein. Disgusting.
It's very sandy.
And then I thought all protein tasted like that, so I just thought it was gross.
It's funny because when I first started getting into training, I loved protein. And, I'd froth it. I got Rocky Road flavor, white chocolate and all that stuff. And now when you drink it, you're like, this sucks.
Disgusting.
I don't mind it. Like, I mean, these days, and to be fair, the flavoring systems are so good these days.
Much better.
Yeah. I mean, plain whey protein concentrate, there's nothing worse. It's horrific.
All right. BK, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram under the handle Brandon Kempter, and that is basically where I'm at. You can probably find me on Facebook, but I'm not on TikTok yet. You guys on TikTok?
No.
Hey,
I am.
good on you.
Bridget does dances. We catch her in the corner filming her dances.
No, thank you so much for coming on, Brandon.
Thank you.
You're such a gentleman of the sport. No one's got a bad thing to say about you. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brandon.
Bam.
Thank you so much for listening to the ZeroW Podcast. If you want more information, head to our Instagram, ZeroW_weakness. Hit the link in the bio for all of our services and any information on upcoming workshops and events. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review so we can have a broader reach and answer more people's questions. Thank you once more.